I always feel very special coming to these meetings because you always meet victims of gross violation of human rights all over the world, which reinforces not only me, but all the people who attend these UN Watch meetings, a great commitment to the cause of defending human rights, regardless of where they are. Usually I say that the diplomats think twice before saying nothing. So I'll try to say a couple of things, and don't worry, I'm not going to read all this. I just want to use it as a sort of a flight plan in order not to go beyond my time allotted by Hillary. I am very proud to be a member of the board of this institution that has been actually at the forefront of the defense of my people's plight and human rights violations for many years, actually more than anyone else. I'm sure you know about Pablo Escobar and Chapo Guzman, the two most important narco traffickers in the world. But none of them were able to rule in Colombia or in Mexico, where they were from. But in Venezuela, the counterparts are in power. The president of Venezuela, his wife, and his two children are in jail in the United States for narco trafficking. Maduro and his wife have been indicted by the U.S. Treasury Department for narco trafficking, for money laundering, and gross violation of human rights. The vice president of Venezuela, Lady Rodriguez, the vice president of economic affairs, is one of the 10 most wanted persons in the United States. His name is El Aizami. The other gentleman, El Chapo Cabello, the head of the government's party, is also in the list. All these people and tens of more are included in the list of sanctions by the United States government and also the European community for gross violation of human rights. So this is not a government. This is not even a regime. It is a criminal corporation, and as such should be considered by this institution where we're sitting today here in the Palais des Nations, beginning with the Secretary General of the United Nations, who is extremely deferential to a criminal corporation such as the one I'm talking about. Why are we here today? We're here starting tomorrow officially a campaign launched by UN Watch, a global campaign to suspend Venezuela from the Human Rights Council. It is inexplicable that a criminal corporation could be a member for the second time of this organization. I'm not shocked because I've been at the United Nations enough to know, I've been in the inside of the monster, so I know it well. But we are not so naive to believe that only by suspending Maduro, we are going to rescue our freedom in Venezuela. This is a first step. But we understand that with people, we have to inform public opinion as much as we can about the criminal nature of this monster that we have with Maduro and his cronies in order to really regain more information that will allow us to go to the General Assembly. We are encouraged because in 2011, UN Watch led a campaign to suspend Libya. People thought that was not possible. Well, they did it. In the case of Venezuela, we are also encouraged. We know that this is a very uphill battle, but we are encouraged by that. We're encouraged by so many other things. For example, I see in this room, I have a lady from my country, Rosa Orozco, sitting in the back, whose daughter was shot 5 times by 2 National Guardsmen from Venezuela when she was 23 years old. That's the age of my twin daughters today, 23. So, and she's one of the persons who were assassinated in the streets of Venezuela for peaceful demonstration. I don't want to make an inventory of the Venezuelan tragedy, but for example, the regime, this criminal corporation, have created something they call exemplary sanctions. What is that? Is that the torture of citizens, women and men, violated sexually with instruments to instill fear and terror in our people. I mean, the crime, not only of creating as a state policy, torture, is something really that hasn't happened in Latin America, ever. Incredible. Next week, as Elaine was saying, in this building of the United Nations, Venezuela will sit among 47 members of the Human Rights Council. This is actually will be a shameful day for all the members of the United Nations. The regime beat Costa Rica in the October election at the General Assembly for 9 votes. Costa Rica is the oldest democracy in Latin America. And you say, how could this happen? Well, the Chavez regime and then the Maduro criminal corporation have been very generous with the peoples of my country's people's resources and monies to buy accommodations and complicities all over the United Nations. That was the only thing that could explain that by 9 votes, a country like Costa Rica was defeated by the Maduro regime. I believe, Irene, I never told you, that when we succeed in this campaign, the people will be happier. Will be the few countries that are in this Human Rights Council that we were going to liberate them of the repugnance of sitting next to the Venezuelan criminal corporation. I think they will be the first that will have to celebrate this achievement when we do it. You know, Human Watch honored me, asking me to lead this. I am leading this together with a group of volunteers, especially ladies, by the way, who are in Canada, in Atlanta, in Norway, very few people, who has made it possible that today we have 126,000 signatures. In Venezuela, people are afraid to sign because the regime have persecuted people who signed previously. So even though that, we are aiming to get 1 million signatures. There is something I would like probably to confess here with you. I was in the Security Council during the Bosnian War, and I learned, and I led the first United Nations mission to a theater of war. And why was it the first operation ever? Because the permanent members and the Secretariat do not like that the non-permanent members find out the truth of what's going on the ground. And I led this mission together. I had the Russian ambassador, the French, New Zealand, and Hungary, and Pakistan. And I went to Srebrenica, that you know now what happened afterwards. And I said there, a slow motion genocide is taking place here before the eyes of the world. At the time, it was in the New York Times, kind of everywhere. And the permanent members, no, Diego have never seen a war. This is not going to happen. We must continue negotiating, dialogue, conversation, which is a very European way to treat other people's problems. Had Europeans treated that during the Second World War, the world would be much different. But when it is a case, for example, of a country like mine, the Europeans, like the United Nations tradition, continues to talk about the parties. The parties must meet. This immoral equivalence of victims and victimizers is really horrible. That's what explains that all kinds of differences are extended to people like the Maduro regime. And I learned, I said at the time in the council, the Serbs will not stop their genocidal march because they know you are never going to put a finger upon them. And if you don't do it, and then they didn't do it. And of course, the continued conversations, and the Muslims lost almost 300,000 people. And what I anticipated in Srebrenica happened a year afterwards. Kofi Annan, whom I became a special advisor when he was Secretary General, asked me to speak on the 10th anniversary of the massacre and genocide in Srebrenica. And it was done at the Hammarskjöld Library at the United Nations. And it was a full room of diplomats, and I said, I feel like a murderer must feel returning to the scene of the crime that was committed few meters away from this room at the Security Council. And it is true. This was really a crime committed before the eyes of the world. And now I see it. You can see it in Syria. I was watching yesterday. Children dying, there's no, the Uyghurs, well, we're here tomorrow. The indifference and this, you know why, this is my last word. When you sit in the Security Council, they bring you papers white. If it is blue, because the resolution is white, and it says, for example, yesterday in Sarajevo, a bazooka exploded in the school, and 13 children were killed, and these parts are spread around the, and then you pass the page, because you don't see the blood, you don't hear the screams, you don't see the tears, and that's the distance that the United Nations takes from our problems. And that's what I learned when I went to Srebrenica. You know, we'll never give up. I know that the obstacles are huge, enormous, but I understand that everything that I am, I owe it to be a Venezuelan. And that's a debt which I can never pay. And I feel encouraged by people like Geraldine Moreno and the hundreds of young people who have given their lives, and the political prisoners that we have in my country, you know, that really make us impossible to give up. And I was trying to tell my countrymen, you know, Václav Havel said something. He said, we should not be afraid to dream the seemingly impossible if we want the seemingly impossible to become a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Arria, for your very powerful remarks. There are more than 4 million Venezuelans who have been forced into exile, the largest refugee situation in the Americas in history, and they look to individuals like yourself to come here to the United Nations to be their voice, and you are their voice. And as you mentioned, it was not that long ago, it was 10 years ago, when sadly the regime of Colonel Gaddafi was elected not only chair of the old Commission on Human Rights, that was 2003, but after the reform of 2006, when we created the new council, a few years later, in May 2010, Colonel Gaddafi's regime was elected to the new Human Rights Council. And we said, this is impossible, this is unbelievable. And we launched a campaign. And we brought victims of torture, Libyan torture, and the Pan Am 103 Lockerbie bombing. And they were here in this building to testify. And people said, it's impossible. They were just elected with 140 votes saying yes. Nobody said no. No one opposed. Not America. Nobody said no. And it's impossible. And yet 6 months later, because of particular situations, but we had 60 NGOs that were on this campaign. And then, you know, Britain and others remembered that Libya is there and that you can remove them. And they did. So it happened in 2011. Libya was removed. And we hope we already have. We want to reach, as you said, 1 million signatures. We already have more than 10% of that, 125,000, and that is in order to put pressure on the General Assembly to fulfill their obligation to remove countries that commit gross and systematic abuses, and we believe that it will happen and that the true representatives of Venezuela could take that seat. So thank you very much.